Hey, night owls! Did you know that night shifts are not just about late hours and tired eyes? They are also breeding grounds for spooky encounters that will send shivers down your spine. So grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and get ready for bone-chilling night shift horror stories based on real events. Welcome back to our channel, where we delve into the darkest corners of the night. Tonight, we have a special treat for you. Terrifying tales that happen during the witching hours of the night shift. Get ready to experience fear like never before as we recount these spine-tingling stories that will haunt your dreams. Picture this. The clock strikes midnight and you find yourself alone in a dimly lit office, the only sound being the hum of the flickering fluorescent lights. Working the night shift comes with a sense of isolation and an eerie atmosphere that sets the stage for the supernatural to creep in. Each of our stories takes place in this unsettling setting where normality fades away and fear takes hold. Let's dive into the first story. I work as a security guard at an old warehouse. Usually night shifts are calm, but one night everything changed. I was sitting in my booth when I heard strange noises coming from a distant corner of the warehouse. I took my flashlight and went to check it out. When I reached the source of the sound, I saw that one of the boxes had fallen off a shelf. I picked it up and saw that it was empty. Shrugging, I returned to the booth. But the noises didn't stop. The entire warehouse was filled with whispers, and it seemed like someone was moving in the shadows. I went to check again and discovered that one of the doors, which was always locked, was now ajar. I opened it fully and saw an old staircase leading down. There shouldn't have been any basements in the warehouse. Descending the stairs, I found a small room filled with old documents and photographs. One of them showed my booth, but the photo looked very old, as if it was decades old. At that moment, my flashlight started flickering, and I heard a quiet laugh behind me. I ran out of there and never returned to that warehouse. The next day, I quit and still have no idea what was down there. Night shift at the hospital. Working as a nurse on the night shift, I often encounter unexplained things. But one night stands out among the rest. I was on duty on a floor where critically ill patients were being treated. Suddenly, I noticed that one of the patients, who was in a coma, started whispering. I got closer to hear what he was saying. He was naming the names of those who had died on this floor in recent months. He couldn't possibly know their names, but he was calling them out as if they were right in front of him. Suddenly he opened his eyes and grabbed my hand, saying, "They've come for you." I stepped back, and his vital signs plummeted. We tried to save him, but he died on the spot. After that incident, I often felt someone's presence in the hospital corridors. It wasn't just my imagination. Other nurses also reported strange occurrences. One night, passing by an empty room, I saw a woman's figure in the window reflection, but when I turned around, no one was there. Night shift at the gas station. Working the night shift at a gas station, I often faced strange and creepy things. One night, around 3 a.m., an old car pulled up. An elderly woman who looked very distressed was behind the wheel. She asked for my help to fill up her car because her car wasn't working. I agreed and started pumping her gas. While I was busy, she began telling me that she was driving to her daughter's house because she was afraid someone was following her. Suddenly, I felt someone watching me and looked around. Outside the store window stood a tall man in an old coat and hat. His eyes were completely black. I froze in fear. He stood still, just staring at us. When I returned to the woman, she had disappeared. The car was still there, but she wasn't inside. I ran back to the store and locked all the doors. The tall man was gone too. The next day, I found out from colleagues that 10 years ago, that woman and her husband died in a car accident near the gas station. Since then, I no longer work night shifts. Night watchman in the museum. I work as a night watchman at an old museum. Usually my job involves walking through the halls and making sure everything is in order. One night, while passing the ancient artifacts exhibit, I heard strange whispering. I decided to check if someone was hiding in the halls. As I passed by a sarcophagus, I noticed its lid was slightly open. I had a bad feeling, but mustered up the courage to look inside. The sarcophagus was empty. I continued my patrol, but the whispering grew louder. I started to make out words, but they were in a language I didn't know. Suddenly, all the exhibits around me began to move. Statues came to life and mummies started writhing. I ran out, and the whispering turned into sinister laughter. I left the museum and never returned. The next day, I learned that many people had died in that museum, and their spirits still roam the halls. Abandoned hotel. I worked as a security guard at an old, long-closed hotel. The building was in bad shape, and it was said to be haunted by the ghost of the former owner. One night, while on duty on the top floor, I heard footsteps in the corridor. I followed the sound and saw light coming from under one of the room doors. I knew it was impossible since all the doors were locked. I opened the door and saw that the room was fully furnished, as if someone was living there. A man in old-fashioned clothes was sitting on the bed, looking at me. He said, "You shouldn't be here." I tried to talk to him, but he suddenly disappeared, and the room returned to its abandoned state. Everything was covered in dust, and the furniture looked ancient. I returned to my post and heard the footsteps in the corridor again. That night I couldn't sleep. The next day I quit. That hotel still stands empty, and I'm sure the owner's ghost is still there. My dead friend keeps messaging me. My friend Emily died about a year ago. It was a terrible time for all of us, and I still can't believe she's gone. We had been best friends since childhood, and her loss left a huge void in my life. A few weeks ago, I started getting messages from Emily. At first I thought someone was playing a prank or had hacked her account, but the messages were too personal, too precise for it to be anyone else. The first message came at night. "Do you remember our place?" I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. Our place was an old park where we used to walk often. I didn't know how to react, so I decided not to reply. The next day, another message came. "I miss you." My heart skipped a beat. This was too much. I decided to talk to someone about what was happening. I told our mutual friend, but he just laughed and said it was probably someone messing with me. The messages kept coming. "You need to come to the park. I need to talk to you. I'm here in the park." My fear and anxiety grew with each day. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to go to the park to put an end to this. At night, armed only with a flashlight and my phone, I went to our park. Everything was quiet and empty. I walked around trying to figure out what was going on. Suddenly my phone vibrated, a new message. "I see you." I froze, looking around. The flashlight illuminated something in the bushes. I got closer and saw nothing, just a shadow I mistook for a person. At that moment, I realized someone was playing a cruel joke on me and decided to leave. When I got home, I received one last message. "You shouldn't have left. I'm waiting for you." That was the last message I received from Emily. I don't know who it was or what it meant, but since then, I don't go to our park anymore. Maybe it was a mean prank. Or maybe Emily was really trying to reach out to me from another world. Whatever it was, I don't want to think about it anymore. The library basement. I worked the night shift at a university library. One of my duties was to check the basement storage area to make sure everything was secure. The basement was always creepy, with its dim lighting and rows of old books and archives. One night, while doing my rounds, I heard the sound of pages turning. I followed the noise to the back of the basement, where the oldest books were kept. As I approached, the sound stopped, and the temperature dropped noticeably. I shone my flashlight around, but saw no one. As I turned to leave, I saw a figure out of the corner of my eye, a man in old-fashioned clothes standing between the shelves. I quickly turned the flashlight toward him, but he was gone. I rushed back upstairs, and from that night on, I refused to go to the basement alone. The haunted hotel room. I used to work the night shift at a historic hotel that was rumored to be haunted. One particular room, room 217, was known for strange occurrences. Guests would often request to be moved after reporting odd noises and ghostly apparitions. One night the hotel was fully booked and a couple was checked into room 217. Around 3 a.m., they came running down to the front desk, pale and terrified. They claimed they had seen a woman in a white dress standing at the foot of their bed staring at them. I accompanied them back to the room to retrieve their belongings. As we entered, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The air was freezing, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. We quickly grabbed their things and moved them to another room. I never went back into room 217 alone after that. The factory shadows. I worked the night shift at a factory. One night, while making my rounds, I saw a shadow moving in the corner of my eye. I turned, but there was nothing there. I continued my patrol, but the feeling of being watched persisted. As I walked past the machinery, I saw the shadow again, this time darting behind a machine. I called out, but there was no response. I checked behind the machine, but it was empty. I was beginning to think I was losing my mind when I saw the shadow once more, this time standing still in the middle of the room. I approached slowly, but it vanished before my eyes. I later learned from a co-worker that a worker had died in an accident in that very area years ago. Ever since then, people have reported seeing shadows and hearing strange noises during the night shift. The late night call. I work as a night shift operator at a call center. One night, I received a call from a woman who sounded extremely distressed. She said she needed help and that someone was in her house. I tried to get more information from her, but the call abruptly ended. I reported the call to my supervisor, and we traced the number. It was from a house that had been abandoned for years. There was no way anyone could have been calling from there. The incident left me deeply unsettled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. The cemetery groundskeeper. I work as a groundskeeper at a cemetery, mostly during the night shift. One night, while making my rounds, I noticed a figure standing by a gravestone. Thinking it was a visitor who had stayed past closing time, I approached to tell them they needed to leave. As I got closer, the figure turned to look at me. It was a woman in a long dress, her face pale and eyes hollow. Before I could say anything, she disappeared right before my eyes. I was frozen in place, unsure of what I had just seen. The next day, I mentioned the incident to a co-worker. He told me that the grave where I saw the figure belonged to a woman who had died over 100 years ago. Her ghost had been seen by several groundskeepers over the years, always appearing and disappearing without a trace. The night shift at the morgue. I worked the night shift at a morgue. One night, while I was working alone, I heard a loud crash coming from the autopsy room. I ran to see what had happened and found that one of the metal tables had been overturned. I checked the security footage, but it showed nothing unusual. The table had seemingly flipped over on its own. As I was reviewing the footage, the lights in the room flickered, and I felt a cold breeze even though all the windows were closed. I continued my work, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling. A few hours later, I heard footsteps coming from the hallway. I went to check but found no one there. The sound of footsteps continued throughout the night, but I never found the source. It was one of the most terrifying nights I've ever experienced on the job, the warehouse phantom. I worked the night shift at a large warehouse. One night I was making my rounds when I heard what sounded like a child's laughter coming from one of the aisles. It was odd because the warehouse should have been empty. I followed the sound, and as I turned the corner, I saw a small figure dart behind some boxes. I called out, but there was no response. As I got closer, the temperature dropped suddenly, and my flashlight started to flicker. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but I continued forward. When I reached the boxes, I found nothing but an old, dusty toy. I picked it up, and the laughter started again, this time directly behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. The toy slipped from my hands, and I ran back to my office, locking the door behind me. The next day, I asked my co-workers about it, and one of them told me a story about a child who had gone missing in the area decades ago. They say the child's ghost still haunts the warehouse, looking for their lost toy. The hospital's third floor. I'm a nurse working the night shift at a hospital that's over 100 years old. The third floor is rarely used because it's supposedly haunted. One night, I had to go up there to retrieve some supplies. The moment I stepped out of the elevator, I felt an icy chill run down my spine. As I walked down the dimly lit hallway, I saw a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform standing at the end. I called out to her, but she turned and walked through a door. When I reached the door, it was locked. I peered through the small window and saw the room was empty and covered in dust like it hadn't been used in years. I hurried back to the elevator, and as I was waiting, I heard a faint, eerie humming coming from down the hallway. The elevator doors opened, and I quickly stepped inside. As they closed, I saw the woman standing at the end of the hallway again, staring at me with hollow eyes. I later found out that a nurse had died on the third floor many years ago. Ever since then, staff and patients have reported seeing her ghost wandering the halls. The night shift at the motel. I used to work the night shift at a small, rundown motel off the highway. One night, a man checked in around 2 a.m. He seemed normal at first, but kept glancing over his shoulder as if someone was following him. He paid in cash and didn't provide any ID, which was unusual but not unheard of. After he left, I went back to my usual routine. About an hour later, I heard loud banging on the door of the room he had checked into. I grabbed the master key and went to see what was going on. As I approached, the banging stopped abruptly. I knocked and called out, but there was no response. Using the master key, I unlocked the door and entered the room. It was empty, and the bed hadn't been touched. There was no sign of the man anywhere. The bathroom door was open, and the room was eerily silent. I checked the security cameras, but they showed no one entering or leaving the room after the man checked in. I went back to the front desk, thoroughly creeped out. The next morning, the cleaning staff found the man's key on the nightstand, but there was still no sign of him. I told my manager about the incident, and she just shrugged, saying strange things happened there all the time. These stories highlight the eerie and often inexplicable events that night shift workers can encounter, leaving them with lingering fears and unanswered questions. These stories are truly frightening and make you wonder what really happens at night when most people are asleep. In each of these stories, there comes a moment when fear reaches its peak, and the line between reality and the supernatural blurs. It's the key moment that will make your heart race and send a chill down your spine. Get ready to witness the most terrifying moments in these night shift horror stories. As we reach the end of our journey through these spine-tingling tales, one thing becomes clear. The night shift is not for the faint of heart. The fear-inducing nature of working in the dark, isolated hours of the night is a breeding ground for the paranormal and the unexplained. We hope these stories have left you on edge, with a newfound appreciation for the eerie world of night shifts. If you've experienced your own night shift horror story, we want to hear from you. Share your chilling encounters in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more bone-chilling content. Stay tuned for our next video, where we will dive into more terrifying tales that will keep you up at night. Thanks for watching, and remember to keep the lights on.